On the 23rd of May, 2016, two Indian police officers from Pune, Dinesh and Tarakeshwari Rathod, claimed they had stood on the summit of Everest. The country applauded. The state handed out cash rewards. Government departments called them heroes. And a tweet from the Maharashtra police collected thousands of ecstatic responses. A few weeks later, another Indian climber, Satyarup Siddhanta, opened his own photographs from his ascent and recognized in the Rathod's so-called summit shot his own jacket, his own boots, his own posture. The faces in the picture were strangers. This is not a story about a mountain. It is a story about how two strangers' faces were pasted onto someone else's victory, and what was left of the word achievement after that. Their biographies are almost identical. Dinesh Chandrakant Rathod and Tarakeshwari Chandrakant Behelarao were constables in the Maharashtra State Police, serving in Pune, a city of more than 1 million. Both were around 30. Both wore the uniform of the same department. Both lined up in the same morning formation. In the early service photos, they looked like thousands of small-town Indian police officers. Calm faces, shoulder patches, neatly combed hair. Nothing in this biography promises the Himalayas. At some point, the scale shifts. They get married. After the wedding, both of them start talking about the mountains differently, no longer as a hobby, but as a chance to break out of district policing into a big, loud story. The title, First Married Couple from India on Everest, is not just a line in a newspaper. It is a ticket into the national mythology. For an achievement like that, the state pays bonuses, agencies organize ceremonial welcomes, TV channels open their broadcasts with you, your superiors promise promotions. That thought becomes the central one for them. Not mountaineering, not routes, not training. Specifically the title. They begin appearing in local papers as a sporting couple, publishing photos from various peaks, talking about training, getting comfortable in front of microphones. In 2014, other Indian climbers accused them of faking ascents in the Aussie 10 Challenge program, the 10 highest points of Australia. The community kicks up a fuss. Questions arise about photographs, dates, accounts. No sanctions follow. No dismissal, not even a police inquiry. The silence turns out to be more important than any certificate. It teaches the couple their first dangerous lesson. You get away with a fake if you pitch it to the press correctly. They take that lesson with them to the highest mountain on the planet. In the spring of 2016, the Rathods sign up for an Everest expedition through a Nepalese agency, Makalu Adventure, a small trekking company, not one of the best-known operators on the mountain. The big players take serious money and screen their clients more carefully. Smaller agencies are easier going about taking on any client who can pay. On paper, the route is the classic one. The southern Nepalese side, the Buddhist villages of the Khumbu Valley, the famous bridges over the river, base camp at the foot of the Khumbu Icefall, then Camp 2, Camp 3, the South Col. Hundreds of clients on commercial expeditions take this path every year. According to the official version, the Rathods pay for the permit at the Nepal Ministry of Tourism, get oxygen bottles, hire Sherpas, eat in the shared mess tents, wait for the weather window. On paper, everything looks like an ordinary, not particularly wealthy, but determined foreign couple. The reality will be described later, and quite differently. By the later testimony of the agency itself, not a single Sherpa will confirm that the couple actually reached the summit. Some will say they saw them in the lower camps. Others, that they didn't even make it to the final push. But all of that will surface only under the pressure of an investigation. The 2016 season is considered a successful one. The weather window opens in the second half of May. Dozens of expeditions move on the mountain at the same time. A long chain of climbers stretches along the ridge. Among those dozens is the Indian climber Satyarup Siddhanta. He has his own motivation, his own gear, his own team. He is on the same route, and on the morning of the 21st of May 2016, in clear weather, he stands on the highest point of the planet. He documents it carefully. Photos, video, time stamps. What will happen to that archive next, he does not yet suspect. Nearby, on the same mountain, something is being constructed that Siddhanta knows nothing about yet. The Rathods name the 23rd of May, 2016, as the date of their summit. 2 days later. According to their version, during the night before the 23rd, they leave the upper camp on the South Col, walk up in the dark, and stand on the summit together, husband and wife, holding hands. They speak of 15 minutes on top, of selfies with the Indian tricolor, of hugs and tears of joy. A textbook story for the press, no frostbite, no serious health problems. They claim they returned safely to base camp, then to Kathmandu, and brought back from the mountain a whole folder of photographs. A shot with the Indian flag unfurled in the wind. A frame of the two of them embracing, several portraits in close-up. The frames look triumphant, and Indian social media spreads them within hours of the couple's return to the Nepalese capital. Those who look at these photographs more closely notice something strange. In some shots, Dinesh stands wearing a red and black down jacket. In others, in the very same pose, his jacket is orange. In some frames, the boots are yellow and black. In others, a different model and shade. Down below, no one would pay attention. But at 8,848 meters, this is absurd. On the summit of Everest, no one changes clothes. Every movement in the death zone costs strength, and experienced climbers will not switch jackets in that wind and cold. An expert eye sees it instantly. These frames were either taken in different places or not on the mountain at all. The version about 15 minutes of shared triumph starts to fall apart even before the press conference. The version of 15 minutes of shared triumph does, however, survive until the press conference. On the 5th of June, 2016, journalists gather in Kathmandu, and Dinesh and Tarakeshwari step up to the microphones. They speak briskly, confidently, quote the classics of mountaineering, thank the Sherpas and the country. They declare themselves the first Indian married couple to conquer Everest. A ready-made newspaper headline. Indian media pick up the storyline within hours. Channel after channel shows the smiling constables, runs proud captions under their names, compares them to national heroes of the past. Newspapers in Pune come out with large portraits of the couple. Morning shows repeat the same line. Ordinary police officers from Maharashtra have become the first couple from India to climb the highest point on the planet. A beautiful story, a convenient one. On the 8th of June, 2016, the official account of the Pune police publishes a short but emotionally charged tweet. You have literally taken the Maharashtra police to new heights. Underneath, thousands of likes, congratulations, mountain emojis. The Ministry of Home Affairs and local authorities prepare awards and cash bonuses. One official already speaks on camera about promotions in the works. Colleagues from the department congratulate the pair. The leadership is publicly proud. School children send drawings of the mountain and the Indian flag. For several days, the couple becomes the country's main sports story. Federal outlets write about them, television studios invite them in, photographers shoot them next to police vehicles in uniform, at their kitchen table, at school assemblies. All of this happens against the backdrop of that very folder of photographs that experienced climbers are already studying with growing bewilderment. The state hands out laurels faster than anyone manages to doubt. That haste will become one of the main reasons for the exposure. The exposure begins not in an investigator's office and not in the editorial room of a major outlet. It begins at an ordinary screen in an ordinary apartment, where a man is sitting who himself was on that very summit not long ago. At the end of June 2016, the Indian climber Satyarup Siddhanta is going through the photographs from his expedition. He has just returned from Everest, is sorting through his archive, preparing material for lectures. Someone sends him a screenshot from a social media post where the Rathod's summit shot is proudly displayed. Siddhanta looks and freezes. He recognizes his own suit, not similar to it, exactly his own. The same characteristic stains on the fabric, the same folds on the hood, the same pattern of reinforced panels. He recognizes the boots. In the Rathod's photo, the color has been altered, but the shape, the lacing, and the characteristic scuff marks match his own footwear from the 21st of May. And the posture. He recognizes his own posture down to the smallest detail, the same angle of the body, the same stance of the legs, the same outstretched arm with the flag. The match in silhouette is so close that there is no room for doubt. The figure in the picture stands exactly the way he stood. Only the face is somebody else's. In the Rathod's shot, Tarakeshwari's face has been carefully laid over his own. In another similar frame, Dinesh's face. and the Indian flag has been painted over Siddhanta's hands to hide the recognizable position of his fingers. A simple and unpleasant picture takes shape in Siddhanta's head, his ascent, his work, his risk, used as a stage set. Someone else's face is glued onto his figure. And these are the faces of both spouses, Dinesh and Tarakeshwari, montaged onto the same frames as equals, as co-authors of one and the same forgery. From that moment, Siddhanta stops being a witness of the season and becomes the principal whistleblower against the couple half of India had been applauding only a week earlier. In the Indian climbing community, the strange Rathod photographs are already being whispered about. Siddhanta is not alone. On the 16th of June, 2016, 8 Indian climbers file a joint complaint with the Pune police commissioner. They arrive with printouts, enlarged details of the photographs, calculations. They point out inconsistencies in clothing, different boots, light and shadow that do not line up across frames from the same supposed morning. Experienced climbers stress the basic point. At 8,848 meters, no one changes clothes because any stop risks frostbite, and you cannot remain without a down jacket in the death zone. By the logic of the high mountains, between 2 frames of Dinesh in different jackets, there should not be 15 minutes on the summit, but hours of descent and a change of gear in camp. If, on top of that, the summit in both cases is the same one, the photographs are fakes. On the 1st of July, 2016, Satyarab Siddhanta files his own personal formal statement. With it, he attaches his original photographs from the 21st of May, the chronology of the day, the metadata of the images, statements from the Sherpas of his team, and accounts from his expedition partners. This is no longer guesswork or comments online. It is a full dossier for an investigation. Originals, fakes, explanations, and timestamps in a single folder. The complaints also reach the Nepal Ministry of Tourism. Nepalese officials launch their own inquiry, interview participants of the season, and request documents from the Makalu Adventure Agency. Under that pressure, the Maharashtra police can no longer stay silent. The department officially opens an internal review and suspends the couple from duty until the situation is clarified. A story that a week earlier had sounded like a victory becomes a disciplinary and interstate affair. Technical experts join the work. Specialists on the Nepalese and Indian sides take the Rathod's photographs apart, pixel by pixel. They compare lighting, shadows, the direction of the sun, the geometry of the frame, the background behind the climber's shoulders. In the Rathod's photographs, they find the characteristic traces of morphing, blurred edges around the face, artifacts on the seams of the clothing, uneven noise at the points of compositing. A comparison with Siddhanta's archive finishes off the couple's version once and for all. The jacket, the boots, the pattern of the fabric, and the background match the Indian climber's photographs with a precision impossible for 2 different expeditions taking turns. The line of clouds, the outlines of neighboring peaks, the position of the figure relative to the horizon, all of it works against the Rathods. The time of summit stated in their climb log does not match the weather data the experts request from meteorologists. According to that data, the window on the 23rd of May looked nothing like what the Rathod's words describe. Then come the Sherpa interviews. Questioned separately, they cannot confirm that the couple was on the summit. Some say they did not see the spouses above a certain altitude. Others, that they fell behind and turned back before the final push. The accounts diverge in the details, but they agree on the main point. There is no credible witness to their presence at 8,848 meters. Under the weight of expert analysis and interviews, the Makalu Adventure Agency itself shifts position. At first, it insists on its client's truthfulness, then admits that it helped process certificates without real grounds. On the 28th of August, 2016, the Indian inquiry officially names the photographs forgeries. The Nepal Ministry of Tourism reaches the same conclusions on the basis of its own interviews and image analysis. The version of the first Indian married couple on Everest is declared a fabrication on both sides of the border. Then come the formal decisions. Nepal reacts first. The Ministry of Tourism officially withdraws the climbers' certificates issued to the couple in the summer of 2016. They are struck from the official list of those who summited Everest that season. Their surnames disappear from beside other real names. This is the first heavy blow to the national mythology they had been so carefully fitting themselves into. It gets harder. The Nepal Ministry of Tourism imposes a ban on any climbing in the country for 10 years. The ban covers not only Everest, but every Nepalese peak that requires a permit. For climbers with ambitions on the level of the first couple on an 8,000er, this is the end of their public career in the Himalayas. The doors to the most famous mountains on the planet close with a single document. The Mekalu Adventure Agency is punished as well. It is fined $4,000 for taking part in the forgery, and for issuing false confirmations to the Ministry of Tourism. By the standards of commercial mountaineering, that is a small sum, but the very fact of a public fine becomes a signal to the entire industry. Against the backdrop of the scandal, other similar cases come to the surface. Officials admit it. Their own system of verification turned out to be weak. Certificates had been issued for too long on the basis of photographs and notes, without physical verification. The names of other questionable summiteers with strange photos start being mentioned in the press. The Rathod story becomes a catalyst. From this moment on, Everest is publicly discussed for the first time on this scale as a mountain on which an ascent can be bought. The climbing community, always protective of the purity of achievements, speaks about it more and more loudly, and is no longer shy about naming names. The certificate withdrawal becomes the start of a conversation about a much bigger systemic problem. This systemic problem has specific faces, and those faces do not admit defeat. Dinesh and Tarakeshwari insist to the end that they were on the summit of Everest. They call the accusations the schemes of envious people, speak of an allegedly orchestrated campaign against them, and promise to produce additional evidence. New photographs, new testimonies, new videos. They produce no such evidence, not a single photograph, not a single piece of video, not a single witness capable of confirming their version. Each new interview sounds like the previous one, generalities about an achievement, grievances against critics, and promises to prove everything. The investigation moves on without them and does not need their participation. They refuse to return the bonuses and the awards in their possession. Their public position is that the state and public organizations rewarded them deservedly, and they are keeping those rewards. The officials who handed those laurels out so quickly take no serious public action. To demand the money back, you have to officially admit your own mistake. No one is in a hurry to do that. In Maharashtra, the case moves slowly. The Pune police limit themselves to suspending the couple from duty, then extend the suspension, then extend it again. Internal hearings drag on, formulations appear, reports are drafted, but no criminal proceedings are opened. The very tweet about new heights, posted on the 8th of June, is quietly deleted. The state offers no official apology for its enthusiasm. Indian media gradually lose interest in the story they had hoisted up so loudly. A victory storyline turns into an inconvenient one, and inconvenient storylines fade quickly in the Indian media field. Airtime goes to new heroes, new scandals, new records. The Rathod scandal continues to live on in specialist climbing publications and in the memory of those who saw the forgeries with their own eyes. A formal resolution does eventually arrive. In August 2017, more than a year after the first press conference in Kathmandu, the Maharashtra police finally complete the dismissal of the Rathods. The decision appears without grand statements, without big features on federal channels, without involvement from senior figures of the state. Just an internal order that has gone through all the necessary approvals. The wording of the official decision is dry and unusually clear. The couple is charged with faking the ascent, morphing the photographs, spreading false information. A rare case in which a state structure calls things by their proper names in its own words. But that is where it ends. No criminal case is ever opened, not for forgery of documents, not for misuse of awards, not for deception of the public. The bonuses paid for the historic achievement are left with them. No one tries to recover the money through the courts. The awards and certificates handed out at ceremonial events formally remain in the couple's possession. This becomes one of the strangest legal curiosities in the story. The state acknowledges that the achievement is fiction. The state dismisses the officers for the fiction. And at the same time, the state's medals for that fictional achievement go on sitting on the offender's shelf. A few short notes appear in the regional press. No portraits on the front page, no interviews. The topic disappears from the agenda almost at once. Not a single Indian mountaineering federation issues a loud public condemnation. The climbing world discusses the case mostly among itself, rather than in front of cameras. The scandal is buried more quietly than it was raised. The noise during the awards ceremony was heard across the country. The noise during the exposure stayed inside specialist publications. That mismatch in volume becomes the heaviest note in the whole story, especially when you turn your eyes from the press releases to the mountain itself. On Everest, by the count of researchers, more than 300 dead climbers remain. They were never brought down. At high altitude, evacuation is almost impossible. Many of those names have long become part of mountaineering memory and landmarks along the route. Among them is the Indian climber Tsewang Paljor, known to the world as Green Boots. He died in the tragic season of 1996, and his figure in those distinctive bright green boots was, for almost 3 decades, a known marker on the Northeast Ridge. The Briton David Sharp died in 2006 on that same ridge, and the circumstances of that day are still discussed in the climbing community. The German climber Hannelore Schmatz became the first woman to die on the slopes of Everest in 1979. Memory of her remained part of the southern route for a long time. Sergei and Francis Arsentiev stayed on Everest in 1998. Francis did not survive an oxygenless ascent. Sergei did not survive his attempt to go back for her. Husband and wife both stayed on the mountain. The story of that pair entered the books. The Japanese climber Yasuko Namba died in the same storm of 1996 as Paljor, unable to descend from a great altitude. Behind each of these names is a living person. Years of preparation, real risk, a price paid. All of them reached the summit or remained on the route. Each of them was actually there, on the roof of the planet or on the way to it. When someone else's faces are pasted onto someone else's jacket and someone else's flag, this line of memory is humiliated. A certificate is not the same as a step at 8,848 meters, and no lie will ever stand on the same level as those who paid the real price. The Rathod case changes the conversation about Everest, about commercial expeditions, about the role of Sherpas and agencies, about fake certificates. Before 2016, such suspicions existed, but they were voiced mostly within narrow climbing clubs. After the exposure, the summit factory begins to be discussed openly at the level of ministries and major federations. Nepal gradually tightens the rules on photographic evidence. Climbers are required to provide video documentation with a GPS tag, reliable Sherpa witnesses, transparent reports. Mountaineering federations openly discuss for the first time a practice in which agencies and guides may for years have helped clients with forged certificates for the right fee. Journalists begin to write about it, to make investigations and podcasts, and the topic gradually enters public vocabulary. In India, the Rathod case becomes one of the symbols of how the state hands out rewards for loud headlines without checking the facts. Stories about a first couple and a historic achievement turn out to be beautiful, but there is no one to verify them. Officials hand out cash prizes faster than sports organizations manage to examine the photographs. That gap becomes a separate topic, and not only in mountaineering. Satyarap Siddhanta keeps going to the mountains. He sets new personal goals, climbs other 8,000ers and the 7 summits, and openly talks about his investigation of the Rathod case in lectures and interviews. Dinesh and Tarakeshwari themselves barely appear in public. Their accounts go quiet. Their former media activity fades. A criminal prosecution for the forgery in India has to this day never been filed. The awards formally remain in their hands. The bonuses have not been returned. And on the highest point of the planet, those who paid the real price for it are still there. Their memory, not invented certificates, is the true measure of what it means to have been on Everest. April 27, 2013. The Lhotse Face at 7,200 meters. 2 of the world's finest climbers, Italian Simone Moro and Swiss Ueli Steck, find themselves at the center of an event Everest had never seen before. A few hours later, in the camp at 6,400, their tent will be surrounded by a crowd of roughly 100 Sherpas. Stones will fly toward the tent. One of them will strike Steck across the face. Moro will drop to his knees. And exactly 4 years later, Steck will be found on the glacier beneath Nuptse. What happened on the morning of that day? Each side has its own truth, and neither one cancels out the other. Simone Moro was born on October 27, 1967, in Bergamo, in northern Italy, right at the foot of the Alps. The city is pressed up against the mountains, and the horizon of snowy ridges has been visible from his windows since childhood. For the boy, it became part of every morning. From his teenage years, he tried himself on rock, first on the small walls of Lombardy, then on the classic routes of the Dolomites. By the early 90s, Moro realized that the usual European walls were already too small for him, and he moved into high-altitude mountaineering. The Himalayas and the Karakoram became his main territory. He added a second profession to his climbing career. He obtained a helicopter pilot's license and went to work as a rescuer. At great heights, his machine pulls people off glaciers when no one else could help them. Ueli Steck chose a different path, and he came to it later. He was born on October 4, 1976, in the Swiss canton of Bern, in the small town of Langnau am Emmental. As a child, he played hockey, and he came to the mountains later than his peers from the alpine villages. Where others start climbing rock at age 10, Steck began training seriously at 17. Perhaps it was precisely the late start that made him obsessed with speed. By the early 2000s, he was already known in the Alps as the man who climbed the classic walls 3 times faster than any predecessor. The nickname, the Swiss Machine, stuck with him after the north face of the Eiger. So, in high-altitude climbing, 2 very different characters appeared. One, an Italian from Bergamo, who loves the winter cold and long expeditions in the Karakoram, who can wait for his weather window for months. The other, a Swiss who doesn't like waiting at all, who turns a multi-day ascent into hours, sometimes minutes. They walk toward the same summit of the profession by different roads, one through winter Himalaya and meticulous planning, the other through speed and solo movement on the edge. When their paths joined into a single rope team, that difference gave the team strength. And, as April 2013 will show, that same difference will give it a weak spot. By 2013, Moro had already completed 3 winter first ascents of 8,000ers, something considered nearly impossible. Shishapangma in the winter of 2005, Makalu in the winter of 2009, Gasherbrum II in the winter of 2011. On each of these ascents, he worked in small teams, in conditions where an ordinary expedition simply cannot survive physically. He knows how to endure cold, darkness, and long waits for weather. In that same decade, Ueli Steck rewrote the records of the Alps. In 2008, he climbed the north face of the Eiger in 2 hours, 47 minutes, 33 seconds. Before him, that route was considered a multi-day project. Then the north face of the Matterhorn, 1 hour, 56 minutes. Then the south face of Annapurna and several more ascents, each of which became a milestone in the technical history of the Himalayas. Twice Steck received the Golden Ice Axe, the highest award in world mountaineering. His reputation at that point was simple. He could climb big walls at a speed nobody had previously credited a human with. In the early teens, these two began planning joint projects. What united them was not similarity, but respect for each other's style. Moro saw in Steck an engine capable of pushing through a technical section where Moro himself was stronger in endurance. Steck saw in Moro a man who could read a mountain in a long rhythm and didn't panic at altitude. A third naturally gravitated toward this pair, British climber and photographer Jonathan Griffith. He was younger than both, with a series of routes in the Alps and Karakoram behind him. And he knew how to work in a rope team without unnecessary words. The 3 of them chose a goal they had each been eyeing separately for a long time, the Everest Lhotse Traverse, an ascent of the highest point on the planet, a crossing to the neighboring 4th highest summit in the world, and a descent down its slope. All of this in alpine style, without commercial camps, without outside help, without oxygen. The idea was ambitious even for the 3 best climbers of their time. By April 2013, it stopped being theory. Moro, Steck, and Griffith arrived at Everest Base Camp with their plan and their supplies. They were not part of any major commercial expedition. They had their own tents, their own ropes, food, schedules. Everything was their own. An autonomous trio at this level had not appeared on Everest in the commercial era for a long time. Around them, the south side of the mountain lived by its usual rhythm. On the Khumbu Glacier, the icefall doctors were working, a small team of Nepali specialists who, every season, fixed the icefall with ropes and ladders. Higher up, between Camp 2 and Camp 3, another team was setting up the fixed lines on the Lhotse face. This work was the foundation of all seasonal commerce on Everest. Hundreds of clients who paid large sums for the climb would later move along these ropes. The work was coordinated by the SPCC committee and the season's largest operators, Russell Bryce, Henry Todd, the IMG expedition. Each company contributed its share, each got its place in the common schedule. The sirdar of the team fixing the lines on the day of the incident was the experienced Sherpa Mingma Tenzing. Behind him stood years of work on 8,000ers, authority within the community, and the full trust of his employers. Within this system, the appearance of three climbers who moved without fixed lines and didn't pay for the shared infrastructure created a hidden tension. Formally, they owed nothing to anyone. They were going outside the commercial routes, on their own line. But in reality, anyone working on the wall moves in shared space with others. And when your workplace is below, and a man passes above you who is in no way subordinate to you, an invisible crack already exists between you. The Europeans planned to move along the Lhotse face parallel to the Sherpas' work, without using their fixed ropes. They were not breaking any written rules, but in the mountains the rules are not always written. Sometimes they are made of glances, gestures, and habits. On the morning of April the 27th, 2013, the rope team of Moro, Steck, and Griffith left Camp 2 for an acclimatization climb. They were not making a summit push, they were not racing to the top. Their task was simpler, and at the same time, more important, to bring the body up to roughly 7,200 meters, hold it there for a while, and descend. It was routine work, the kind that's necessary so that later the body can move higher than 8,000. The weather that morning was clear. Visibility on the Lhotse face was good. The sky was cloudless. The sun was rising over the edge of the western CWM. The temperature stayed low. The wind was moderate. Conditions for climbing were nearly ideal. The trio moved at their usual pace, Steck in front, Moro and Griffith behind him. They were dressed in light high-altitude kits, climbing with protection but without anchoring to the fixed ropes. In parallel, a team of Sherpas was working up the same wall. By various estimates, the group numbered about 15 to 17 people. They were placing anchors, pulling the lines, driving in ice screws. The work was physically heavy, doubly so at altitude. Every meter of rope had to be lifted, pulled, and secured. Among the Sherpas there was the usual division of labor. Someone was placing protection, someone was belaying, someone was carrying the coils. They moved more slowly than the trio, but the entire commercial climbing season depended on their pace. The Europeans tried to stay off to the side of the Sherpas' work line, on their own route. They passed above or to the side, depending on the terrain. Up to a certain point this worked, but the Lhotse face is not flat. There are sections where there's only one convenient way through, and both routes converge. At about 7,200 meters, the paths of the two groups crossed, and it was right here that the event began from which one of the loudest stories in modern Himalayan mountaineering would later grow. Within a minute, it became clear. Something had gone wrong. Each side would later have its own retelling, and the retellings are hard to reconcile. According to the Sherpas, the Europeans' movement above their heads dislodged a piece of ice. That piece fell down and struck one of the Nepalis. The size of the fragment is described differently by different sources, but the Sherpas considered the fact of contact proven. From their point of view, this was not an accident, but a consequence of someone else's disregard. They were working, ice was flying at them, a man was injured. That was enough to stop the work. According to Moro, Steck, and Griffith, the picture was different. The ice on the Lhotse face is in constant motion. Something falls every hour, and a dislodged fragment could have come down on its own. They saw no contact with a person, they noticed no impact. When they heard a shout from below, at first they didn't understand what had caused it. To them, it seemed the Sherpas were overreacting. A verbal conflict flared up between the groups right there on the wall. Voices carried across dozens of meters of cold air. According to the Sherpas, in that moment, Simone Moro shouted an offensive word in Nepali in his irritation. Moro himself would later confirm. A swear word was uttered. He would publicly apologize and call it the biggest mistake of that day. Steck and Griffith confirmed the heat of the argument, but described the details differently. The Sherpas stopped working. They demanded that the Europeans leave the wall immediately. The argument was simple. As long as outsiders were above them, no one would fix the ropes. Without the ropes, the entire commercial program of the season would be on hold. The threat was formulated briefly and unambiguously. The team of Moro, Steck, and Griffith turned around and began descending toward Camp 2. On the wall, everything stayed within a verbal conflict. But the dispute did not end there. It only moved into another phase. The new phase began a few hours later, no longer on the wall but down below, at the camp known to climbers as Advanced Base Camp, or Camp 2, at about 6,400 meters. Here, on the icy terrace beneath the western CWM of Everest, stood the tents of dozens of expeditions. When the Sherpas, having returned from the climb, came down to ABC and told their version of events, a large group approached the tents of Moro, Steck, and Griffith. According to various sources, the crowd grew to between 50 and 150 people. The figure of 100 is the one most often cited. Among them, reporters from the commercial expeditions, cooks from base camp, guides, workers from the rope-fixing team. Many of these people had not been on the wall that morning, but the news of the conflict spread instantly, and the grievance within the community was shared. The tent in which the three were sitting was surrounded by a tight ring. From the circle came loud demands. Several people spoke in raised voices. Threats were heard. The language barrier made the situation sharper. The Europeans didn't understand the exact words, but they understood the tone. From different directions, stones flew at the walls of the tent and into the ground nearby. One of them struck Ueli Steck across the face. The injury was light, but the mark was visible. In that moment, the situation could have spilled in any direction. Simone Moro made a decision that would later be discussed on every climbing forum on the planet. He stepped out of the tent. He didn't try to argue. He didn't try to make excuses. He dropped to his knees right on the ice in front of those gathered and publicly asked for forgiveness. The gesture was neither tactical nor for show. Moro understood that his words on the wall that morning had become part of what was now happening. For a minute, the crowd grew quieter. People didn't disperse, but the tension eased. And in that minute, those who would turn the crowd back into a camp stepped into the circle. These were Western guides and leaders of commercial expeditions whom the conflict had caught in the same camp. Among the observers was American climber Melissa Arnott. By the spring of 2013, she had already summited Everest several times, was known in the Sherpa community, and spoke conversational Nepali. She was known and respected on both sides of the imaginary line that, on this day, had divided the camp. Working alongside her was Greg Vernavaj, leader of the IMG expedition. On this mountain, he was a man of the system, one of those who, every season, negotiates with the Sherpas, pays them, insures them, and works with them for years. His word in the community carried more weight than the word of any visiting climber. Arnott entered into negotiations with the senior Sherpas. She did not justify the Europeans, and she did not argue the substance of the morning's conflict. She asked for one thing, to give the trio a chance to leave. Without that pause, she explained, the conflict could spin out of control, and its consequences would fall first and foremost on the Sherpas themselves. The elders in the community took responsibility and asked the crowd to step aside. Some people left immediately, others remained standing off to one side. Vernavaj and other Western guides came up to the tent and helped Moro, Steck, and Griffith pack a minimum of belongings. The trio was led out of the tent. They were escorted across the camp toward the start of the descent to base camp. They walked in a tight group, guides on either side, Sherpas off to the side. Stones were no longer flying, but the atmosphere remained tense. At base camp, below the Khumbu icefall, the trio was received by other expeditions. They were given first aid. Steck's facial wound was treated. By the evening of April 27th, Moro, Steck, and Griffith were already under the protection of several Western teams. The mountain was closed to them for that season, but most importantly, they were alive and unharmed. What had happened during those hours would be picked apart in interviews and blogs for a long time to come. The picking apart would begin a day later, but first the event needed to be formally closed, right there at base camp, while both sides were still on the mountain. On April 28, 2013, a day after the clash, an official meeting of the parties took place at base camp. The mediator was an officer of the Nepali army. By the rules of the Ministry of Tourism, every large expedition is accompanied each season by an army liaison officer who maintains order and processes the paperwork. On ordinary days, this is an almost invisible figure, On this day, it was precisely the officer who became the man who brought both sides to one table and proposed closing the conflict according to Nepali rules. The Sherpas and the Europeans signed a document. The contents came down to a few simple points. The parties undertake not to renew the confrontation. The parties make no mutual claims against one another. The Sherpas, for their part, undertake not to obstruct the further descent of the Europeans. Moro, Steck, and Griffith, for their part, undertake to leave the mountain for that season. The document was short, but for the Nepali system, it closed the case. After signing the agreement, the trio gathered the remainder of their gear and left base camp. A few days later, on foot along the familiar trail to Lukla and from there by plane, they returned to Kathmandu. Everest was closed to them for that spring. Their grand plan, the Everest Lhotse traverse in alpine style, remained unfulfilled. The Nepali Ministry of Tourism in parallel began an internal investigation. Participants, guides, and observers were interviewed. The investigation dragged on for several weeks. No direct criminal charges were brought against any of the participants. Neither the Europeans nor the Sherpas were formally punished. The case was closed on the basis of the peace settlement signed at the camp. The mountain let them go. But the story had already moved beyond Everest. By the time Moro, Steck, and Griffith landed in Europe, the brawl on Everest was being written about all around the world. The argument began without a clear front line. The news of the clash flew around the world's media within 24 hours. Outside, National Geographic, The Guardian, Reuters, Agence France-Presse, the major outlets ran in-depth pieces, new posts, photos of the camp, comments from witnesses appeared on social networks every day. The mountaineering community split into two camps. The line of the split ran not along countries and not along generations, but along how each person saw Everest in the modern era. One side felt that the Europeans had disrespected the work of the Sherpas and provoked the conflict. By that logic, 3 of the world's best climbers had come to a mountain where Nepali specialists had worked for decades and decided to move as if those people weren't there. The ice that fell and the word spoken in irritation became merely an excuse. The real cause was an attitude that had been building up for years. The other side condemned collective pressure and a forceful resolution of the dispute. By that logic, any grievances could have been discussed at the camp calmly. To surround a tent and throw stones is unacceptable in mountain ethics. Supporters of this view emphasize that, in the conditions of a camp where everyone depends on everyone else, a crowd against 3 is not justice but a show of force. In several interviews, Simone Moro acknowledged his share of the blame in the escalation. He called the word he had spoken that morning the worst mistake of that day and publicly apologized to the community. Ueli Steck stressed that he was ready to apologize, but did not consider what was happening to be just. Jonathan Griffith later posted his own timeline of events and photos of the wall on his blog. The Sherpas as a community did not offer public apologies. They stuck to their version of events, that the ice falling from above had not been accidental, that the insult had been real, and that the community's reaction was a natural defense of their own. Not one of the community elders came out to the press with a different explanation. The split, after this, did not heal. It simply moved into the background. Questions inside each participant remained. A few months after Everest, Ueli Steck went back to the Himalayas. He chose a mountain that had already been one of the main goals of his career, Annapurna, more precisely, its south face, one of the longest and most dangerous walls in the world. On October 8th and 9th, 2013, Steck made a solo ascent of the south face of Annapurna. The climb lasted about 28 hours, without a partner, without a rope on most of the route, without oxygen. He started at night from the lower camp. By dawn, moved on to the key buttress. By midday, was already above the central snowfield. The route is considered one of the most dangerous in high-altitude mountaineering. On the south face of Annapurna, outstanding climbers of different generations had perished. Avalanches, ice collapses, the length of the route. Everything works against a person. Steck climbed up and back down in one non-stop push. His time on the mountain turned a multi-day project into a record-short single push. On the descent, Steck lost his camera. Part of the climb was left without photo documentation. This raised doubts among some critics. Supporters of strict verification demanded objective evidence. After studying the indirect data, the GPS tracks, and the observations from base camp, the majority of experts in world mountaineering accepted the fact of the climb. In 2014, Steck received his second Golden Ice Axe for Annapurna. The award ceremony was held in Chamonix, and the hall stood up when his name was called. It was his triumph, and at the same time, a quiet response to the Everest story. He didn't try to convince his critics with words. He went back to the most dangerous wall on the planet and climbed it alone. Moro would not have such a personal answer. He had his own rhythm of work. For Steck, though, Annapurna was an attempt to answer for himself the questions that had remained after Everest. The mountain forgives or doesn't forgive, but there is no crowd in it. On the wall, a person is alone again. For the last time, this would repeat itself 4 years later. On April 30th, 2017, Ueli Steck went out alone on an acclimatization climb on Nuptse. Nuptse is a 7,000er in the Everest Massif. Its main summit reaches 7,861 meters. The mountain stands right next to Lhotse and Everest, forming with them the famous triangle of peaks above base camp. In photographs from the south side, it often appears in the foreground, blocking the higher neighboring summits. Steck was preparing for a new big project, once again the traverse of Everest and Lhotse, the very route that had not worked out in 2013. He wanted to take that goal back and complete it. Acclimatization was needed for the preparation, and Nuptse was the logical choice. He climbed without a partner. He had no communication that day. The route ran along the western side of the mountain, in a zone that rarely falls within the field of view of other expeditions. What exactly happened on the slope during those hours, no one saw. By the evening of April 30th, contact with Steck could not be established. The next day, a helicopter flew to the foot of the western slope of Nuptse. From the air, the pilot noticed traces of a fall on the glacier. It became clear the climber had fallen from a great height. Steck was found at the base of the slope. The exact altitude of the fall and its immediate cause were never established. There were several versions: a broken-off rock, a movement error, a local collapse, and none of them could be proven. The mountain left the question without an answer, as often happens with solo climbs. The date of his death fell almost exactly 4 years after the incident of April 27, 2013. The coincidence was random but striking. The climbing world said farewell to one of the strongest mountaineers of his generation. Friends, relatives, and colleagues from all over the world gathered at the farewell in Switzerland. Simone Moro was among them. Two roads which had once converged for one spring inside one tent parted for good. One ended, the other continued. Everest, after 2013, lived through one more shock. On April 18, 2014, an avalanche came down in the Khumbu icefall and took the lives of 16 Nepalis. The icefall doctors and the porters were caught in the epicenter of the collapse. It was the largest single loss of the Sherpa community in the mountain's history. The tragedy shifted the public discussion of the role and working conditions of the Sherpas on Everest. Topics that, after the brawl of 2013, had been on the periphery came to the foreground: insurance, pay, voice in expeditions. On February 26, 2016, Simone Moro, together with Alex Chikun and Muhammad Ali Sadpara, made the first winter ascent of Nanga Parbat. It was Moro's fourth winter first ascent on an 8,000er. No climber in history has made that many winter premieres on mountains higher than 8,000. The mountain he had been working on for years had finally yielded to him. On the team, he worked shoulder to shoulder with the Pakistani porter Sadpara. And for Moro, this was especially important after Everest. Moro continues to fly the rescue helicopter and to work in the Himalayas. He pulls people off great heights when no one else would help them. His career as a rescuer is no less important than his career as a climber. The Sherpas remain the key force of logistics on Everest. Their role in the industry only continues to grow. Without them, seasonal commerce is not possible. The story of April 27, 2013, has entered the textbooks of mountaineering as an example of the collision of two truths in the mountains. Each side had its own logic. Each considered itself to be defending. The mountain does not distinguish between white and Nepali, between guides and clients. It is one for everyone who climbs it, and that, perhaps, is the only thing in it that is truly shared. July 30th, 1954, 8,100 meters up the slope of K2. 24-year-old Walter Bonatti and Pakistani porter Amir Mahdi are standing in the dark. On their backs, oxygen for two men who are supposed to make the summit push the next morning. The tent they were climbing toward is not at the agreed spot. It has been moved up the mountain by another 250 meters, without warning, minus 50 degrees Celsius, an open slope, no bivouac gear at all. After this night, Mahdi will lose his toes, but Bonatti will survive, and then he will spend half a century defending himself against a twisted version of the events, fighting for the truth about whose glory he risked his life for. The real story here doesn't happen on the mountain. It happens after. In June of 1930, in Bergamo, a boy is born named Walter Bonatti. 24 years later, his name will be stitched permanently to the loudest Italian victory in the post-war mountains, and to the loudest cover-up that follows that victory. The family is not wealthy. Northern Italy, mountains close by. From his teenage years, the moment he gets a chance, he heads for the Alps. The cliffs of Grigna near Lecco become his school. That is where he learns to climb. By 20, he stands out among the young Italian climbers. By 24, they consider him the strongest young alpinist in the country and one of the strongest in Europe. In July 1951, together with Luciano Gigo, he makes the first ascent of the east face of the Grand Capucin in the Mont Blanc Massif. Before them, the route was considered impossible. Bonatti climbs it cleanly, without posturing, and after that wall it becomes impossible to ignore him. His reputation by this point is a particular kind. He polishes his technique to a mathematical precision. Tough. He can go alone where others won't go in a pair. And on top of that, quiet. He doesn't like interviews. He doesn't want to talk about himself. He doesn't play the part of the public hero. In the world of 1950s Italian climbing, full of ambition and ritual, a man like that looks foreign. When in 1953 Italy starts preparing a major expedition to K2, Bonatti ends up on the candidate list. Among the senior veterans, he is the youngest and the most gifted. That doesn't make him a favorite, quite the opposite. The older climbers feel their own bruised ambitions standing behind his back. They respect him as a technician, but they fear him as a rival. Already at the team formation stage, several strong men quietly begin to wish for one thing: that this kid from Bergamo not be the first to set foot on the summit of K2. That wish becomes the starting point of a long silence. That wish smolders inside the team even before they reach the foot of K2. And it lands on very specific ground, a national race. Everest is already taken. The British put Hillary and Tenzing on the roof of the world the year before. The French took Annapurna in 1950. The highest 8,000ers are falling, one after another, into other countries' columns. Italy needs its own mountain, its own great altitude, and that mountain is K2, the last unclimbed 8,000er at that point, the second highest peak on the planet, 8,611 meters of stone and ice on the border between Pakistan and China. The expedition leader is Ardito Desio, a geologist, a Karakoram explorer, a strong-willed and rigid man. He is not a sport climber himself. He is an administrator. The mission is set at a state level: return the summit to Italy at any cost. Desio builds the expedition on a military model. Discipline is absolute. There is no voting. He alone makes the decisions. The team is built from 11 climbers and around 500 Pakistani porters. Among the experienced ones is Achille Compagnoni, 39, a mountain guide from Valferva, and Lino Lasiadelli, 28, a guide from Cortina, both strong, both ambitious, both convinced that the summit belongs to them. Bonatti makes the team as one of the youngest, 24 years old, no major Himalayan altitude on his record, but in superb technical shape. Desio counts on him as a high-altitude load carrier and a backup for the summit pair. The style of the expedition is classic siege climbing, a chain of camps up the mountain, fixed ropes, oxygen bottles for the summit, a push that takes weeks, not a sprint, but a long siege advance, where every link depends on the next. By the end of July 1954, the chain is in place. On the slopes of K2 stands a string of 8 high camps. The last one, Camp 8, sits at around 7,700 meters, on what is called the Abruzzi Shoulder. The team is exhausted, but close. Desio makes the central decision of the expedition. As the first summit pair, he names Achille Compagnoni and Lino Lazzadelli, two seasoned guides, both over 30, both politically convenient for the leadership. The plan for July 30th looks like this. In the morning, the summit pair leaves Camp 8 and climbs higher to set up Camp 9, the last platform before the top. By agreement, that camp must stand at around 7,900 meters at a strictly defined point. The oxygen bottles for the summit attempt are to be brought up by another team. For this task, Decio assigns Bonatti and the Pakistani porter Amir Mahdi. Their role is clear: catch up with the summit pair, hand them the bottles, descend back to Camp 8. Without those bottles, there is no ascent. Without them, Compagnoni and Lazzadelli will not take 10 steps above 8,000 meters. Mahdi is a Hunza, an experienced high-altitude worker who has walked with Europeans through the Karakoram more than once. Strong, durable, used to heavy loads. But his gear is poor. On his feet he has standard army boots. There were not enough insulated high-altitude boots to go around, and no one bothered to fix that. At the altitudes where ordinary footwear can't hold off the cold for even a few hours, those boots are useless. That single detail will turn out to be one of the cruelest in the entire story. On paper, the plan is logical. Bonatti and Mahdi bring up the oxygen. The summit pair goes for the top. No one is supposed to spend the night up there. That is the foundational principle of the entire plan, and it is exactly the principle that will be broken. On the morning of July 30th, 1954, Bonatti and Mahdi leave Camp 8. On each man's back, a heavy oxygen apparatus and bottles. They themselves carry no tent and no sleeping bags. They are not staying up there. Their job is simple: catch the summit pair, leave the oxygen at Camp 9, and head straight back down. By evening, they should be at Camp 8, so every spare kilogram has been swapped for air for the men going to the top. The climb is harder than they expected. The snow is deep. Mahdi is visibly fading. His feet in those army boots are freezing. Bonatti is dragging both the load and the pace. Late in the evening, they reach the altitude where, by plan, the tent of Camp 9 is supposed to be standing, around 7,900 meters, the agreed point, the logical place. The tent is not there. They look around. No trace of any camp, only the slope, the wind, and a sky that is darkening fast. Bonatti can't believe it. The camp is supposed to be here. The agreement was absolute. Only later will it come out that Compagnoni and Lazzadelli pitched their tent about 250 meters above the agreed mark, and not on the line of ascent, but off to the side, behind a complicated rock band, with no warning over the radio, no marks on the snow. Bonatti and Mahdi stand in the dark at 8,100 meters and shout into nothing. Out of the darkness come only fragments of voices that can't be tracked. Around 10 in the evening, on the slope above, a lantern flashes. In its light, a silhouette appears. Lino Lazzadelli. He is standing at the entrance of his tent, the tent that was supposed to be 250 meters lower. He hears Bonatti shouting, and he answers. The answer is simple: leave the bottles, go back down to Camp 8. Bonatti shouts back that they cannot descend now. The dark is total. The slope is iced over, with no fixed ropes. Mahdi can barely move. Frostbite is setting in by the minute. Any movement downward in conditions like this is an almost guaranteed fall. Lazzadelli does not answer again. The lantern goes out. The tent stays silent. The two men below are left alone. Bonatti has no choice. He does the only thing that can still be done at 8,100 meters at night with no equipment. He chops a narrow ledge into the slope with his ice axe and sits Mahdi straight down on the ice. He sits next to him, shoulder to shoulder. No tent, no sack, no stove, no hot water, no food. They are in the kind of down jackets that are made for a daytime climb. The temperature drops to -50. The wind cuts the face. Bonatti feels his fingers going numb, his feet losing sensation. Mahdi next to him starts screaming. He no longer understands where he is. He tries to stand up and walk down on his own, into the total dark of the slope. Bonatti holds him back by force. Again and again, he pulls him back down, covers him from the wind with his own body, shakes him, refuses to let him fall asleep. They don't sleep all night. Sleeping here is not allowed. At that altitude and that cold, sleeping would mean the end. They hold on to each other and wait for sunrise. Every minute drags like an hour. Sunrise comes anyway. Bonatti and Mahdi are alive. No one expected that. Not them, not the men in the lower camps, and certainly not the two men in the tent above. An open bivouac at 8,100 meters at -50 without equipment almost always means death. They survived. The price was Mahdi's heavy frostbite. He can barely feel his hands or feet. His feet, in those army boots, are completely frozen. So are his hands. His mind is going. Bonatti understands that if they don't go down now, the porter will stay on this ledge forever. He pulls Mahdi up and leaves the oxygen bottles on the ledge, just as agreed. He has done his part. The oxygen is there. Let the summit pair come and get it themselves. The descent is brutal. Bonatti leads a barely conscious Mahdi down that same icy slope. In some places he supports him. In others, he places his feet into his own boot prints. Mahdi reaches Camp 8 a little before Bonatti. That fact is recorded by witnesses, and it will play an important role later. No one was abandoned. Bonatti belayed and guided him to the last meter. Higher up the slope, at the same time, Compagnoni and Lazzadelli step out of their tent. They climb down to the ledge, take the bottles, and start back up. By 6 in the evening on July 31st, 1954, they are standing on the summit of K2, on the highest stone of the second mountain on the planet. Italy is celebrating. The radio carries the news across the country. Church bells ring in town squares. In the first reports, there is not a single word about what happened that night at 8,100 meters. The two heroes below simply do not exist in that picture. Their story leaks out in fragments to the specialized climbing press, but not to the front pages of the newspapers. And the first man to pay the bill is not Bonatti, it is Mahdi. The Pakistani porter is evacuated off the mountain and taken to a hospital. His condition is severe. The doctors do everything they can to save the limbs from the consequences of frostbite, but they cannot save them all. By the end of his treatment, Mahdi loses the toes on his feet. Some of the fingers on his hands cannot be saved either. He spends about 8 months in the hospital. He leaves it a different man. There will be no more high-altitude expeditions for him. His ties to European climbers will almost completely break. The name Mahdi appears in the official version of the Italian expedition only briefly, with no detail about how he lost his fingers. Bonatti returns to Italy with the team. On piers and at train stations, the team is met with flowers. Compagnoni and Lazzadelli become national heroes. They are photographed, decorated, invited to presidential palaces and parish churches. Their books are printed in big runs. Their interviews go out on the radio. Bonatti stands beside them, but as a shadow at the celebration. His role in the climb has already been described in a single line: a young oxygen porter, nothing more. No story about the night at 8,100 meters. No mention that without the bottles he carried up there would have been no summit. Ardito Decio publishes the official report of the expedition. In that report, the main version is locked in. Camp 9 stood where it was supposed to stand. Bonatti and Mahdi failed to catch the summit pair and bivouacked nearby. Mahdi got frostbitten because of weakness and poor acclimatization. No mention of the camp being moved. No trace of what actually happened. That version will remain the official one for 50 years. In the years that follow, no one challenges it. Bonatti stays silent. He does not want to drag himself into a public quarrel right after K2. Instead, he goes back to the mountains and does what he does best. He climbs. In August 1955, he makes a solo ascent of the southwest pillar of the Petit Dreux in the Mont Blanc Massif. 6 days alone on a vertical granite tower. No partners, no rope belays. That climb will remain one of the symbols of the Alpine Golden Age. In 1958, Bonatti and Carlo Mori make the first ascent of Gasherbrum 4 in the Karakoram, a peak of 7,925 meters. The mountain is considered one of the most difficult in the entire range. He becomes a living legend of European climbing. But inside Italy, his position remains odd. As a climber, he is respected, but he is almost never invited to the celebrations of the K2 victory. At official dinners, his seat at the table is always slightly off to the side. His own book about K2 is published with reluctance, after delays. The air around the 1954 story is dense and toxic. Someone is very comfortable with Bonatti staying half a hero instead of becoming a witness. In 1964, the Turin newspaper, Nuova Gazzetta del Popolo, publishes 2 articles for the K2 anniversary. They run on July 26th and August 1st. In those texts, an even harsher new version is laid out. At 8,100 meters that night, Bonatti supposedly used the oxygen bottles himself, supposedly tried to overtake the summit pair, supposedly abandoned Mahdi alone, and warmed himself on someone else's air. Each of these claims is false, but they are printed in a major newspaper, and Italy reads them over breakfast. This time, Bonatti is not going to stay quiet. He sues the newspaper for libel. The case drags on, slow and heavy. Bonatti has to take every accusation apart, point by point, and prove that it was physically impossible. He works with the expedition's documents, with letters, with Porter reports, with the medical records of Mahdi. The main argument of his defense is technically obvious to anyone who understands the oxygen systems of that period. An oxygen bottle on its own is useless without a mask and a regulator. You cannot breathe straight from the bottle. That night, at 8,100 meters, Bonatti and Mahdi did not have a single mask between them. All the masks were inside the tent of Camp 9, with Compagnoni and Lacedelli. Using the bottles on the open slope was physically impossible. The accusation of stealing oxygen falls apart on a single technical fact. The second argument is the witnesses at Camp 8. They confirmed that Mahdi reached the camp slightly before Bonatti. The young climber abandoned no one. The opposite. He held Mahdi on the ledge all night and then walked him down, almost in his arms. Abandoning the porter was physically impossible. They were tied to one rope on one path. In 1966, the court rules in favor of Bonatti. The newspaper is convicted of libel. It is a victory in the courtroom, but not in the public mind. The Italian Alpine Club, the leading professional body in the country, continues to stay silent. The official Decio version remains in textbooks, in encyclopedias, in school stories of the great Italian triumph. The court ruling proved that the newspaper had lied. It did not prove that the K2 canon itself, the version of Decio and Compagnoni, had also lied. Bonatti, it seems, understands that. Right before the trial, in February 1965, he goes to the Swiss Alps. To the Matterhorn. The year is special. 100 years earlier, in 1865, the Englishman Edward Whymper led the first ascent of this famous peak, an anniversary. Bonatti picks his own gift for the occasion, a new direct route up the north face of the Matterhorn in winter, alone. First, he tries the route with 2 partners, but a storm turns the team back. In the valley, the partners go their separate ways. Bonatti stays alone and makes the call. On February 18, 1965, he steps onto the north face for the second time, alone, with a small backpack and a length of rope for self-belay. A wall 1,200 meters high, with an extreme grade. For 5 days, he hangs alone on vertical ice and rock. 5 nights in hanging bivouacs on the wall. 5 sunrises when frozen fingers have to relearn how to grip an ice axe. On February 22nd, 1965, he tops out on the summit of the Matterhorn. It is one of the greatest solo climbs in the history of world alpinism. And right after that, Bonatti does what no one expects. He announces his retirement from major climbing. 35 years old, the peak of his form, no serious injuries, no financial reasons, just enough. Many people will later believe that the weight of the distorted K2 story played its part in that decision. Bonatti becomes a traveling journalist for the magazine Epoca. He goes off to the wild places of the planet, the Amazon, Alaska, Africa, Patagonia. There are no official versions out there. There is only the land and a man. But Italy will not let him go. No matter how much Bonatti writes about the Indians of the Amazon and the Gobi Desert, the central question of his life stays in one fixed point, that night at 8,100 meters. In books, articles, and interviews, he keeps coming back to K2, with facts, with maps, with witness accounts. He names names, he shows where Camp 9 was supposed to stand and where it actually stood. He writes that his own role and Mahdi's in the success of 1954 was buried under another version of events. Compagnoni and Lacedelli, in their memoirs, keep repeating the old story. Decio defends his official picture to the end of his life. Time goes on. The generation of expedition members fades, one by one. In 2003, the first crack appears. Lino Lacidelli, for the first time, publicly admits that Camp 9 was moved above the agreed point. It is the first admission from the lips of one of the main faces of the Decio version. Hiding the truth any longer is no longer possible. In 2004, the Italian Alpine Club takes an unprecedented step. It appoints a special commission of 3 independent experts and tasks it with reviewing the entire history of the 1954 expedition. The commission is called Tre Saggi, the 3 wise men. They work with the archives, the diaries, the interviews, the medical records of Mahdi, the Porter reports. In April of 2004, their report comes out, 39 pages long. Their conclusion is unambiguous. Bonatti's version is correct on every key point. Camp 9 was moved deliberately. Bonatti did not use the oxygen. Mahdi lost his toes because of a forced open bivouac. In 2007, the Italian Alpine Club publishes a book titled K2, Una Storia Finita. The K2 story is over. The story that had been told the wrong way for half a century. In 2008, the Italian Alpine Club issues a formal apology to Walter Bonatti. He is 78. For half a century, he had lived with a stigma he did not earn. For half a century, he had to prove the obvious. Bonatti accepts the rehabilitation calmly. No triumph, no scenes, no dramatic press conferences. The main thing has been proven within his lifetime. He has lived to see the textbooks and the encyclopedias change, to see the commission of the Italian Alpine Club acknowledge that he was right, to see the names of Decio and Compagnoni stop being synonyms for infallibility. That is enough for him. On September 13th, 2011, Walter Bonatti dies in Rome of a serious illness, 81 years old. The funeral takes place on September 18th in Lecco, the town where, as a teenager, he first started climbing on rock. His ashes are later moved to Porto Venere on the Ligurian coast. Italy says goodbye to him as a national hero, the kind of hero he should have been since 1954. After K2, Amir Mahdi returns to his home valley of Hunza in northern Pakistan. The high-altitude boots once promised to him never came. He lives without his toes, without serious compensation from the Italian side, without European fame. For decades, his name remains a footnote in the books about K2. Only after Bonatti's rehabilitation do people in his own country also start to remember him. The story of 1954 is eventually taught in climbing schools as a case study in the ethics of high-altitude expeditions. It is used to show how one man's ambition can move a camp and break someone else's life, and how an organization that defends its official picture for half a century is, in the end, still forced to rewrite it. Both men survived the mountain in 1954, Mahdi and Bonatti. After that mountain, Mahdi was left with permanent frostbite. From Bonatti, half a century of life was taken not by mountains anymore,